The Monolith Monsters. This is a movie that takes place in the 1950s, when life was ordinary and simple. Just listen to that music. The 1950s are known as the Atomic Age. Audiences were no longer scared by monsters such as Dracula or the Wolfman, when there were real-life terrors such as the atomic bomb. People were also more frightened by the idea of violent species from outer space wiping out mankind with advanced weaponry. You had blobs, body snatchers, and of course, little green men. But then here came a unique little picture that put another spin on the genre, this time with rocks. The Monolith Monsters is light on action, at least until the end, but heavy on science and suspense. It begins with a geologist that finds a shiny black rock out in the desert. He brings it back to his lab to study it, and the next thing you know, it's growing in size. The next day, he's found dead, turned to stone. Soon after, more people around town are turning to stone, so the ordinary townsfolk put matters into their own hands and try to figure out what's going on. I find it funny that the title of the film is The Monolith Monsters, because there's no actual monster. They're just a bunch of big stones. It's the rock's destructive powers that are monstrous. The hero of the film is Dave Miller. He's the one running all over town trying to find a solution to the mineral menace. He discovers that these fragments suck the silicon out of anything that they come in contact with, and also that the meteors expand when exposed to fresh water. So there's all these fragments of the meteor all over the place, but then there's also the main meteor. Later in the picture, when it's raining, it starts to bubble and multiply. And that reminds me of the swimming pool scene in Gremlins. You have to wonder if Joe Dante got the idea to make the Gremlins multiply with water after seeing this movie. Anyhow, when the meteors get tall enough, they become monoliths, and they can't support their own weight, so they crack and crumble to the ground. Then the pieces that break off begin to grow, creating an endless cycle.
Each one that shatters will make 100 more.
When that 100 shatters, there'll be 10,000 of them. The third cycle will create 1,000,000. Unless we can stop them, they'll spread over the whole countryside.
Films of the 1950s were all about giant destructive forces. But what's scary about this is that it's so believable. There's no actual monster or creature for the characters to combat here. It's like fighting against the forces of nature, which makes for a frighteningly realistic threat. It's also a refreshing change from the typical werewolves, vampires, and zombies of the period. Also, being the 50s, expect a lot of scientific jargon.
There's a negative cleavage on every mineral in there.
Oh, he just had to say that. The film was based on a story by Jack Arnold and Robert Fresco. For monster enthusiasts, Arnold directed Creature from the Black Lagoon, and Fresco wrote Tarantula. It's a good thing that they had two talents like that behind the film, because a movie about giant killer rocks could have easily gone off the rails. None of the acting is anything special. Grant Williams is bland, and so's the rest of the cast. The female lead does absolutely nothing of value. Typical of a 1950s movie, I suppose, but why even have her there if she's not going to do anything useful? Stale acting aside, they somehow managed to keep this movie suspenseful, with the fear that the monoliths are slowly approaching. The beginning of this film opens with a meteor crashing to Earth. It explodes, and the effect is recycled footage from It Came from Outer Space, though you barely notice this unless you compared the shots frame by frame. Anyway, these effects were done by Clifford Stein, who worked on many other classics like Son of Kong and This Island Earth. Oh, and here's a small bit of trivia for video game fans. The Tiberium rocks featured in the Command & Conquer series were modeled after the monoliths. While watching this, there was a few flaws that I couldn't help but notice. For one, early in the film, the monoliths take over a small farmhouse with a family inside. The parents are instantly turned to stone and they die. They have a daughter, Jenny, who's in the house, and she's also turning to stone, but for some unknown reason, not as quickly. I think the filmmakers copped out because they just didn't want to kill off a kid because they were afraid of getting a negative response from the audience. In reality, I think they all would have turned to stone at the same rate. And soon after this, the police come to check out the disaster. For some reason, they think the house is all messed up because an explosion went off.
We can rule out the explosion idea. There wasn't any.
An explosion? That's what they think caused this? Just look at the ground. It's covered in hundreds of pounds of strange black meteors. It couldn't possibly be that, could it? And another thing that's a little frustrating is that they never get help from the outside world. These rocks are a threat to the entire country. Shouldn't the military be there? Now, another complaint I've heard about this movie is that it's not scary because there's no way that the monoliths could kill anyone. They take so much time to grow, and they can be seen for so many miles, all you have to do is walk away from them and you'd be fine. That's true, but that's not what I think is scary. To To me, what's frightening is that if these rocks got out in the open, there'd be no way to stop them, and they'd destroy the entire continent.
And once they break through to the other side of the mountains, there'll be no stopping them ever.
Maybe no people would die, but it would sure be one hell of a disaster. This was released on the Ultimate Sci-Fi Collection box set, which contains many other classics. It's a good purchase for any fan of the genre, though it would be nice if they all got a Blu-ray release. Many of the problems in this film revolve around the need to contact people when the power goes out. There's scenes of paperboys going from house to house to warn of the incoming threat. Today, none of this is relevant because everybody has a cell phone, so if you watch this, you're going to have to put yourself in the mindset of the era that it was released. This is one of the more interesting realist American science fiction films of the 1950s, and I love the idea of inanimate objects as the nemesis. Yes, this movie is full of flaws, but you know what? So are a lot of other monster movies. Even classics, such as King Kong, have little things that leave you scratching your head. For example, in King Kong, they knocked him out with gas bombs on the island, right? So why didn't they use the gas bombs when they got to New York? Why does King Kong get a pass while this movie doesn't? Also, this is one film that I think could actually benefit from a modern remake. If they just made the monoliths grow a little faster, it's still a scary concept that could work today. Anyhow, if you can put aside the flaws and inconsistencies, I'd recommend seeing it at least once. It's better than a lot of B-movies from this era, mostly because of its plausibility. Take a look sometime if you get a chance. Just be sure to watch out for all that negative cleavage. It could turn you to stone.